Hello everyone, my name's Dave and welcome to the YouTube channel Anima Animus. And I'm speaking with you today from the heart, the seat of the soul. And I'd just like to say thanks very much to everyone who's liked, shared and subscribed to the channel. That inspires me and I really appreciate that. And today, ladies and gents, I'm going to read from this book from a lady called Anne Gadd, Climbing the Beanstalk, The Hidden Messages, found in Best Loved Fairy Tales. So thanks very much, Anne, for letting me use this material, and thanks very much to my friend Larry who gave me this book and many other books. So thanks guys, I appreciate that. I'm going to read the tale and its associated information in two parts. So I'll do the video on the reading and then another video on the other part of it because it contains 13 pages. Excuse me. So chapter 10, ladies and gents, the tale of Sleeping Beauty. The story as I remember it: once upon a time there lived a king and a queen who had wealth, fine castles, many servants, everything except that which they most wanted, a child. This made them very sad and they tried all manner of things, yet still they remained childless. Many years later the queen gave birth to a baby girl. There was much rejoicing and a big christening was held. They asked all the fairies in the kingdom, 7 in all, to be the child's godmother, so that each of the 7 might bring her a gift. By doing so, the princess was assured of having all the positive attributes imaginable. The christening ceremony was a grand affair, and afterwards everyone went to the palace, where a great celebration had been prepared. In front of each one of the fairies' places had been set a solid gold knife, fork and spoon. Around the intricate gold cutlery were placed many precious stones. As they sat down to eat, an old fairy entered the banquet room. It had been many years, at least 50 in fact, since anyone had seen this fairy, and so she had not been invited. The king ordered his servants to set a place for her, but had none of the fine cutlery and jewels left to give her. The old fairy took offence and swore silently to herself that she would not be thus slighted. Another fairy, hearing this and fearing what action she might take against the baby princess, hid herself behind the curtains, so that should the old fairy cause any harm to the baby, she could undo the damage. Soon the fairies began to give the baby their gifts. The youngest gave her the gift of beauty, the next intelligence, the third grace for all she did, the fourth that she would dance wonderfully, the fifth that she would have the voice of a nightingale, while the sixth gave her extraordinary musical talent. Soon it was the turn of the bitter old fairy, who declared that the princess would have an accident whereby she would pierce her hand with a spindle. The wound would be so bad that the princess would die. The entire royal court, guests, and the king and the queen started to cry over this wicked curse. It was then that the young fairy, hiding behind the curtains, emerged and declared, "Dear king and queen, your daughter will not die from the spindle. I'm not powerful enough to undo the spell of the old fairy. So the princess will pierce her hand with the spindle, but rather than die, she will fall into a deep sleep, after which she will be woken by a prince. To avoid the curse coming true, the king ordered that every spindle was to be banished from the kingdom as long as the princess was alive. When the princess was 15, the king and the queen were visiting one of their other castles. The princess was amusing herself running about in the palace and exploring all its rooms, when she found a small room at the top of one of the towers, where an old woman sat alone, spinning with her spindle. This old dame had never heard of the king's orders, spending much time to herself. The princess inquired as to what the old woman was doing, and when she replied that she was spinning, the curious princess asked if she might try. The old woman did not know she was the princess, and not knowing of the curse, handed the spindle to her. No sooner had she tried to spin than the spindle pierced her hand. The princess collapsed onto the floor. The old woman raised the alarm, and the servants and the courtiers rushed from every corner of the castle, trying all manner of means to revive the princess, all to no avail. The king, who by this time had returned, realized that the bad fairy's curse was coming true, and so had the princess placed gently on the bed. He listened carefully and heard her breathe, and so knew that she was still alive. Yet he mourned when he saw her beautiful face, rosy red cheeks, and beautiful hair. The king ordered that no one was to disturb her, and left her to her slumber. The last good fairy heard what had happened when she was in the kingdom of Matakin, 12,000 leagues away, when a dwarf who had 7-league boots, which allow you to travel very quickly, came to tell her. She arrived at the castle in a carriage drawn by dragons. She realized that when the princess awoke, she would be lonely, for all the people she had known would have died. So the fairy waved her wand and made every living thing in the castle except the king and queen fall asleep. Even the fire fell asleep. The king now declared to all those outside the castle not to come near it. However, in only 15 minutes, a large number of creepers, poison ivy, and thick bushes grew intertwined with each other, forming an impenetrable wall around the castle, so that no curious people could interfere with the sleeping princess. After 100 years, a prince from another kingdom was hunting in the area and asked about the towers that stuck out of the great hedge. He was told all manner of tales and sorcerers, witches and spirits, and an evil ogre who ate children, who lived there, and who alone could penetrate the hedge. The prince was confused by all the tales, until an old man told him the tale that he had heard from his father and his father before him, about the princess who slept there, waiting for the kiss of a prince to awake her. The prince, fired up and spurred on by love and honour, decided to go on this quest. As he arrived at the hedge, it parted, allowing him easy access, and closing before any of its servants could accompany him. However, the brave prince continued into the castle, where he discovered all the people and animals lying as if dead, though by their rosy complexions he could see that they were still alive. At last he came to the chamber where on the bed, embroidered in gold and silver, he found the princess. He approached the beautiful princess and gazed upon her beauty. He bent to kiss her, and at this moment the spell was broken, and the princess woke and looked at him lovingly. They started to talk and expressed their love for 4 hours, and still there was more to say. While this was happening, everyone else awoke, from the dogs to the servants, as if nothing had ever happened. At last everyone persuaded them to have supper in the great hall of mirrors, and the prince and the princess sat down together. After supper they were married in the castle chapel. Now this is where the tale ends in many versions, however, others carry on as follows. Excuse me. The following morning the prince left for the city, where he knew his father would be worried about him. He told his father he had lost his way and had had to spend the night with a friendly chap who offered him wine and bread. The king believed his son, but his mother did not, and became even more suspicious that he may be married when day after day he disappeared to supposedly hunt and regularly did not return until night. This continued for 2 years, during which time he and the princess had two beautiful children, morning a girl and day a boy. On many occasions, the queen attempted to persuade her son to confide in her, but he did not dare trust her with his secret because he was afraid of her, as she was descended from ogres. The king had only married her because she was very wealthy. It was also rumoured that she had trouble containing her desire to eat passing young children, so he could not tell her the truth. 2 years later the king died, and the prince inherited the throne, and in this position of power told her of his marriage and brought the princess and their two children to live with him in his palace. Now that he was king, the prince was required to make war against his neighbour, another king who was the enemy of his father. This meant he had to leave his mother in charge of the kingdom. As soon as he left, the queen sent the princess and her two children into a house in the woods, so that she would not be tempted to give in to her desire and eat them. A few days later, though, she went to the house and told the kitchen maid she wanted morning cooked with a delicious sauce so that she could be eaten. Afraid of the ogress, the cook went to the room of the 4-year-old Morning with a large knife. Morning ran up to him, expecting a game which made him weep, and he knew he could not kill her. Instead, he substituted a lamb, and disguising it with minced sauce, served it to the queen, who loved it. He had, however, taken Morning and hidden her with his wife. A week later, the queen demanded to eat 3-year-old Day. The cook carried Day to his wife to look after, and cooked instead a young goat, dressed in a spicy curry dressing, which once again the queen delighted in eating. Now the ogress had her taste for meat kindled and demanded that the cook prepare the princess for her table. The cook had no idea where to find an animal that might taste the same as the princess, and decided to save his own life. Rather than kill her, he told her of the queen mother's orders. In her desire to see her children, who she thought were dead, the princess ordered the cook to kill her so that she might join him. But he could not, and took her instead to his home to hide her, serving up a young cow to the cruel ogress who delighted in eating it. To cover up for her cruel actions, the queen decided to tell her son that the wolves had eaten his wife and children. Before the queen returned, the king, while she was roaming the house in search of fresh meat, she heard Day crying for her forgiveness from his mother, and Morning begging for the brother not to be beaten for a misdeed. The ogress was furious, having been so deceived, and demanded that by morning a huge pot should be placed in the courtyard, filled with all types of vile reptiles, into which she intended throwing not only the princess, Day and Morning, but the cook and his wife. All were brought out into the courtyard tied in chains, and they were just about to be thrown into the pot when the king arrived home early. He immediately inquired as to what was happening. No one dared to tell him. The ogress, realizing that something was delaying her orders, balanced on the pot to see better what was happening, and tumbled headfirst into it, and was devoured by the creatures inside. The king comforted himself with the loss of his mother in the loving arms of his wife and children, and they lived happily ever after. Now, ladies and gents, some history. Perrault's version is closest to the version I recall. However, there are elements of the Grimm's version called Briar Rose, which are significant and will be discussed in the next section. The Grimm's version is much more sedate, with no hint of cannibalism or overtones of rape. In the Grimm's version, it is a frog who comes to the queen while she is bathing and announcing that she is to have a daughter within a year. The fairies were not fairies but wise women, and there were 12 invited, not 7. As there were only 12 gold plates, the 13th wise woman was intentionally not invited. Also, it is stipulated by the last wise woman, the Sleeping Beauty will sleep for 100 years before being wakened, and no mention is made of the prince's kiss being the reason she will awaken. In the Grimm's version, she finds the same room but opens with a rusty key, as opposed to simply walking inside it. A thick hedge of thorns grew around the castle rather than an assortment of trees and bushes, and the prince was not the only person to try to gain entry to the castle. The other princes, we are told, died a miserable death hooked by the thorns. On the day the prince tried, 100 years had passed, and the thorns transformed into beautiful flowers, allowing him easy entry. He finds his way to the tower, and the princess kisses her, and she awakens, as does the rest of the castle. They are married a few days later, and the story ends there. Most notable is the Grimm's version is the absence of the witch or ogress. Previous versions exist as Persephorest, printed in 1528, where there were 3 goddesses attending the celebrations, and later Giambattista Basile in 1634 wrote Talia, Sun and Moon. In this version, the prince who ravishes the sleeping princess in an act which today would be a clear case of rape already has a wife, and it is she who plots to kill the children and serve them as stew to the prince. Not exactly the epitome of an upstanding young hero. It is while she is giving birth that the princess awakens in this version. Perrault was the first to use the title Sleeping Beauty in 1697, though it was Walt Disney who made the tale most famous. Some versions have the princess giving birth to twins, while Perrault's version is one of the few where she's not woken by a kiss, and the prince does the socially acceptable thing by marrying her before ravishing her. I'm going to leave that there, ladies and gents, and the next video will start off with the mystical meaning of the story. So forgive me for my errors. Thanks very much for tuning in. Hope you have a lovely day. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.